Thank you, Dee, and good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Appreciate your joining us again for our ongoing series with regard to sales skills. And today is a topic that I love to talk about, which are negotiating skills that will allow you to get not only what you need, but more importantly, be able to negotiate what you want. First of all, I'd like to talk about the rules of negotiation. And there are no rules. There is no written set of guidelines or like Robert's Rules of Orders or anything of that nature. And there really is no guidebook or any type of codified rules or regulations. Most negotiation is learned through experience, but we negotiate every day. One of the key foundational tenets that I always like to reinforce at the beginning of our webinars is the concept of the money value of time. All of us know about the time value of money, which is a dollar is worth more today than it is tomorrow, the basis for all compounding and calculation of discounted cash flow. But when we're in the sales world, we want to maximize the value of our time, specifically in terms of the time value of money. Time is the only resource that we have that is truly non-negotiable. We don't have the ability to negotiate time. Don't have the ability to manage time. All we have the ability to do is to choose what activities we decide that we will invest our time in. So to maximize the value of our time, we want to be highly effective in investing our time in those activities that will yield the highest result in the shortest period of time. The money value of time. Oh, so important. So, our aim and focus for today. With regard to negotiation skills, we're going to talk about some of the principles of negotiation. We're going to talk about the 3 stages of a negotiation. And believe it or not, negotiation is actually a discrete process that we can break down into various process steps, which will help us to be much more effective in recognizing tactics that others may be trying to use on us, and more importantly, sharing with you some tactics that you can start to use to become a more effective negotiator. And then we'll close out with some specific best practices. So let's move forward. First of all, let's define what is negotiation. Negotiation is actually a process of communication. And what we do in this process is we define what the actual needs are and the values of another party or parties. And in that, understanding what our needs and values are so that we can actually end up at some point of an exchange of a good or a value or a service. Now, in the business world, our negotiations are usually surrounding the purchase and sale of something or the exchange of a service for consideration. The consideration, more often than not in the business world, is in the form of money. But there's also various forms of consideration. Barter, the exchange of services for services. And what we want to do is open our mind to this, but as we move forward in understanding that in this defined negotiation, that we will have a finite period of time in which to achieve an end. Because without that defined period of time, it's much like having a goal without a deadline. A goal without a deadline is but a dream. And so in a negotiation without a deadline is really just a long, extended conversation. Key points to know in this definition. Negotiation is a process with discrete steps. The fuel of that negotiation is communication between the parties to gain an understanding from the other party of what it is that they want and need, to align that with what we want and need in order to have an exchange. And with that exchange needs to be done within a finite period of time. So let's build on this. Here's some key principles of negotiation. Number 1 is there has to be an exchange of satisfactions. I need to give you a good or a service, and in exchange for that, you're going to pay me. Now, what that amount is of how big is the product, or how much service, or how much are you willing to pay, That's the definition of value. And everybody's values are unique and different. I want to take a real brief minute and talk about the difference between a want and a need, because this is a psychological framing that you really need to understand to be a highly effective negotiator. Let me give you a classic example. I need transportation. I need transportation to get to and from work, to and from the store, for recreation, whatever it may be. That transportation could take the form of a bicycle, a moped, a motorcycle, an automobile, an airplane, a spaceship, whatever I want. What I really want, though, even though I need transportation, and majority of my travel requires a car, the need for me is a car. The want, though, is a Maserati. So, with those 2 points, the need being the minimal amount of what it will take to do what I need to do, but the want is the aspirational best of all worlds without any constraints on resources that I would want to have. Very important. Information. We talked about how communication is what we use throughout the negotiation to find out what the wants and needs and the values of the other party are, but that's based upon the information that we extract in that conversation. And information, accurate information, and most importantly, current information, not based upon assumption or we might hyperbolize. What we want to know is what are the real facts of the situation at this point in time. Because the world turns on its axis every 24 hours. And in that period of time, change is the constant. So things are always changing, and I want to make sure that I have the most current as well as accurate information upon which to make my negotiation worthwhile. Big principle. Never underestimate your ability or your position or your value. Again, this is a perception, often in the mind's eye of an individual or a company or a country or someone else. Many times people grossly underestimate their position, and in so doing, they give a lot and they leave a lot on the table in a negotiation. Never underestimate yourself. Very important concept and key principle is your word is your bond. We're going to talk about the need to get everything in writing. That's at the conclusion of a meeting, getting concurrence and a summary of what happened in the actual negotiation session. Then capturing that and moving forward into some form of a contract. But moreover, as you are negotiating with someone, make sure that you are very cautious yet confident in what you are agreeing or not agreeing to do as you move forward, because it's extremely difficult to walk back an overture or an extension of an offer and be able to maintain your integrity, which is based upon your ability to follow through. Your word is your bond. And like I said, get it in writing. Any and all offers are great offers, and yes, legally there are oral contracts. However, the faintest of ink is the greater of the very best memory. So always get it in writing. Summarize, meeting notes, emails, memos, next steps, contracts, everything in writing. So let's talk about the 3 stages of negotiation. They're very discrete, they're very distinct, and I want you to know what those stages are so that you'll start to feel as you move through these, you'll know exactly where you are in the negotiation. The first is called the overture. And this stage of the negotiation is when we first meet and there's lots of big talk and bluster and I have this and I think it's worth that and wouldn't you like to have this and perhaps it'd be a good idea if we did something. It's starting to seed the idea of the exchange of value. You're testing the waters. If I were to do this, would you do that? If we were to give you this, could you give us that? So what we're starting to do is really determining How wide a field of play are we in here, and what are the key determining factors that we'll start to refine and hone as we move in the negotiation? You'll also find that people will position for power here. And so if you're dealing with a very, very large corporate enterprise, as you can well imagine, if I'm but a lowly vendor of selling a single product or service, and I'm dealing with a very large international corporation, I might be at a little bit of a disadvantage or a perceived disadvantage when trying to negotiate. So I'm wanting to position, and more importantly is start asking the questions to understand where the other side is coming from. Because that leads us naturally into the next stage of the negotiation, which I like to call the dance. The overture is, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like to dance?" "Well, yes, I would, thank you very much." So the music begins, and now we start the dance. This is the discovery phase of the negotiation. This is where we look at all the different options. We start framing our position and really defining what it is that we want, establishing what we need, and then trying to find out from the other side what is the bounds of what it is that they're seeking in terms of their needs and their wants, and then bringing those two together. And we start talking about how long will it take? What do we need to do to show you or demonstrate that we have the ability to do what we say we can do? How much money are we talking about? Are we talking about an initial payment? Are we talking about payment over time? All of these business considerations, terms and conditions, these are all fleshed out when we're in the discovery session, which is called the dance here. And during the dance, many times you're going to find that this is characterized by a couple of things in the business world. Could be a formal quote. It can also be a letter of intent. And what it does is it starts framing what we hope to do as we move forward, and we want to consummate the negotiation, and that's done in the third stage, which is the deal. This is when it starts to really come together, and this is when we have the brass tacks. This is when we've agreed to the general terms and conditions, and we start to see, if I do this, will you do that? It also starts focusing on, we both want to do this, don't we? Yes, we do. Great. So let's find out how we can compromise and how we can exchange something that's going to give you what you want in exchange for what I want. And this is where we have a lot of give and take, and it happens in a very rapid fire succession, and it's moving, usually driven by a deadline. We have to make the deal by this date, or there will be some occurrence. It could be a penalty, or the deal might not happen at all. The deadline is what drives the deal. This is what we want to do early on, is establish a mutually agreed to deadline. So the three stages again: the overture, characterized by the big talk, the bluster, the bravado, moves into the dance, which is the discovery, and then we move to the final stage, which is the deal. This is when it is, are we going to do this or not? And if we're not, we need to part ways, and part ways as friends. So overlaying this, if you will, to move from one negotiation stage to the next, there's an actual process. So I want to share with you some specific things to be thinking about and doing as we're moving from the overture to the dance and then into the final deal stage of the process. Number one, first and foremost, determine the real needs, wants, and how the other party is going to define victory or how they will win. I want to know what the minimum requirement of their need is. What's the minimum they would be willing to take? But more importantly, I want to know what is their aspirational best of all worlds, what it is that they want. And so now in between those two bounds, if I can frame my needs and wants, then we'll come to a mutually agreeable win in which both parties are going to feel as though they've received satisfaction and are going to feel like they made a good deal. Key thing, much like don't underestimate your position or your value, always set high goals and expectations going into the negotiation. Set your initial offer price much higher than what your actual minimum expectation on the need may be. So what we want to do is set very high goals, and then we have the ability to walk back to a point which we'll talk about in just a minute, which is called the walkaway. Key number one rule in negotiation: to the degree possible, always avoid, and always is a very powerful word, so try to avoid making the first offer. It's been proven repeatedly, the party or parties that make the first offer usually end up leaving money on the table. Now, you have to start the conversation somehow, so that's why they put sticker prices on stickers on all the cars in the car lot. That starts the conversation. And believe it or not, and if you're listening to this and you've actually paid sticker price for a car, don't feel bad. Because there's some cars that have such a high perceived value in the marketplace and are in such high demand that the dealer will actually place a premium over and above that, and in some cases will even require a deposit 12 months in advance because a new model is coming out and I want to be the first in my neighborhood to own one. To the degree though that we're involved in our business world environment, avoid making the first offer. Second, and complementary to that, do not accept the first offer. Two reasons for this. Everything is negotiable and you can probably get a better deal. Equally as important though is you, in accepting the first offer, what's going to happen to the other person? How are they going to feel? Psychologically, they're going to think, I should have asked for a lot more because he sure was quick in saying yes to that offer. And in so doing, what you've done is you have put that person off for any future negotiation that they're going to come into that negotiation from a position of distrust as if they've been taken advantage of in this particular sale. So what we want to do is, even if it meets our wildest wants, don't accept the first offer. This then kicks off the negotiation and we've moved into the dance phase. In the dance phase, determine and ask, what are all of the demands that the other party has? What are all their wants, aspirations, desires, constraints, requirements? Get them all listed out before we ever start making a concession. A concession is simply, I will do this if you will do that. I will give this up in exchange to get something from you. We never want to start the concession making part of this process until we know all the demands of the other party, and keep asking that. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would like, or anything else that you need to have in order for us to move forward? Hearing none, great. Then we can start the conversation in deciding which concessions we want to make. Making concessions then in the process, we do that slowly and in small increments, and we make a concession to get a concession. We have been conditioned through a misperceived idea of fairness that you'll hear phrases many times like, well, let's just split the difference, or can you meet me halfway, or let's go 50-50. No, there is no rule book, nor is there a rule in any rule book that exists that says that we need to enter into a negotiation from a position of splitting the difference or going 50-50. Making small concessions in exchange for a concession is a much better approach and allows us to preserve the value of what it is that we really want in order of quickly defaulting and taking what it is that we need at the minimum level. The last point though to make is we're always moving to close, but we will only close if it's meeting what I talked about a little bit earlier. In writing, establish, this is my walkaway. These are the minimum acceptable terms, including price, but other terms there may be in terms of quality or timing or whatever, that I'm willing to accept in order to enter into this deal, in order to frame and sign a contract. If I go below that walkaway, I am not going to make this deal. You will be so surprised how more you will be able to negotiate, how much more you'll be able to negotiate having that ability in making that written walkaway. So how do we do all of this in this process? Well, we ask really, really good questions. And the key in asking questions, I hearken back to an extremely wise man by the name of Confucius. And he has a fabulous proverb. The clever man is known by the answer he gives. However, the wise man is known by the questions he asks. In order to be an effective negotiator, you need to be the wisest man at the table. And the wisest man at the table takes the time to craft and hone and practice the key questions that he needs to ask, so that while we're in the discovery phase of the dance, we're finding out all the information that we need to best position ourselves to negotiate the best deal possible to achieve what we want. So what are the questions? Well, quite frankly, another great author and friend of mine is Rudyard Kipling. And Rudyard Kipling wrote this stanza. It comes from a poem called The Elephant's Child. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and where and when and how and why and who. With those 6 words, what, where, when, how, why, and who, I can ask any question of anybody to find out anything that I need to know in order to move forward in a negotiation to maximize my want. Let me show you this. Not all 6 of these are equal in power. The first 4, who, what, where, and when, are fact questions. When I use those four words in the form of a question, the answer I'm going to receive is a fact. Who is this? Joe Friday. What is he? A detective. Where? Los Angeles, California. When? 1961 to 1963 on the U.S.'s most popular television show, Dragnet. We as Americans tend to ask a lot of fact questions, and we feel very comfortable in doing it. Who, what, where, and when. The great negotiators, though, use the power combo. And the power combo are the other 2 that are not fact questions, and they are how and why. And I always want to lead with how, and then follow with why. Because for 2 reasons. Number 1 is, if I lead with why, many times that can be taken as extremely confrontational. How is the softening question that allows me to position the why to gain understanding. The power of these 2 questions, though, really lies in the fact that they require thought and opinion by the other party. Now I'm finding useful, timely, and hopefully accurate information, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Lead with how, follow with why. And it's very simple. I go into a leadership role as I'm having the conversation in the negotiation and start with the past. So how have you in the past determined which vendors or providers that you will work with? How have you found them to be? So then what I do is I transition and I pivot to the present. So I ask, how are you today? How are you engaging with or finding vendors? How are you finding their performance? And then I want to move to the future state. This is the aspirational state, and this is where you get the greatest degree of opportunity to start framing what it is that they need and to align with what you want. So as I move to the future state, notice something else that I do very interestingly. I stop using the word you and I start using the word we. As I'm taking this leadership position, I start creating the aspirational vision in their mind. How would we? How would we be able to best work together? How will we? How will we determine the timing and the quality and the price on the product that we're selling? How can we find a mutually agreeable and valuable agreed to price for this product or service? And then from those answers to those questions, I have the ability to start framing the negotiation from a leadership perspective. Now, the most important questioning skill of all that requires the greatest amount of patience and practice, but is by far the most powerful questioning skill, is the ability to engage and remain comfortable in silence. Silence is the most powerful communication tool of all. I ask a question and then I wait. Those how and why questions are opinion questions. They require thought. Allow the person to have the time to think. Allow them to answer the question. Pause after they've answered the question. They might want to add to that answer. Now the key is in this is you have to practice this because it's an acquired skill that we as Americans become worse and worse as we have to fill the void of silence with some form of auditory stimulus. Having said that, in the negotiating world, it's a proven fact beyond the shadow of a doubt. The party that opens his mouth is more than likely to, when doing so, offering a concession or agreeing to a point that has been framed and put forward in a question. So let me share with you some phrases that are extremely powerful in negotiations. I'm going to move through these briskly and I encourage you to practice them. Preface any question you ever ask with anyone with "help me to understand." Those two words, help, at the subconscious level in human beings regardless of race, creed, color, nationality, evokes a subconscious awareness that you need help. And I will help you to the degree that I can. When I say help me to understand, what I'm doing is I'm displaying my ignorance. Ignorance is not the same thing as stupidity. I simply don't have the information or the knowledge to understand. I need to gain understanding for us to find a mutually beneficial solution that's going to give you what you want as well as what I want. Help me to understand, then ask the question. Help me to understand. How have you in the past determined the best way or the best price or best vendor or whatever? Secondly, feel, felt, and found. This is a great way to segue into a touchy topic or something that's highly sensitive. I understand how you can feel that way. We've worked with many people in a similar situation that have felt the same. What we typically have found, though, is if we can get all of the issues on the table, we can quickly work through those to a mutual agreement. Wouldn't you agree? Or fair enough? Shall we move forward? So the ability to acknowledge their feeling, others have felt the same way, and so to move to a solution, what we've typically found, this has worked for them, it should work for us. It's extremely effective. Try it. Similar to that is naturally, obviously, and typically. Naturally, we both want to come away with the best deal possible for our respective organizations. Obviously, you have specific wants, needs, and desires as well as we do. So typically at this point what we like to do is put on the table what it is that you want and need so that we can align those with our wants and needs, and I'm highly confident that we can come up with a mutually agreeable solution. Shall we move forward? As we move into the brass tack stage, this phrase is extremely powerful. What if, then? What if I were able to get you delivery by the first of the month? Then would you be able, instead of giving me 20% down, give me 50% down? If I take an action, will you reciprocate with doing something else? Very powerful. If, then. Just remember, if, then. Those of you that many times have been boxed into the corner and are being pressured for an answer, this is your magic escape key. This one word, I need to know. Are you going to do this? Yes, no. The magic word to say in all candor, but with a nice, pleasant smile, is say, perhaps. And the perhaps then gives you the ability to pivot into a if-then statement, or perhaps naturally, obviously, typically, or perhaps feel, felt, or found. It's when you're in that pressure situation and it's usually driven by a deadline for action with either incredible gain or a horrific penalty, you will make the major concession that you can't take back off the table. Perhaps is your friend in the escape valve. All right, I'm going to close out here very briskly with some specific tactics to get what you want, but also be able to recognize it when these tactics are being used by others. Number one, define in writing. Regardless of what it may be, write it down and quantify it in terms of whatever the measure is. Dollars, volume, weight, time, whatever. Start with at one end what you want, the high aspirational without limit or consideration, and at the bottom end, what is it that I need? What is it that I specifically need in order to do this? And most importantly of all is set that walk away. I will not go below this, and then fill in the blank. The price, the amount, the quality, whatever it may be. Remember again, avoid making the first offer, and rarely ever do I use this word, but in this case, never accept the first offer. Never accept the first offer. There's always room for a counter and a compromise. No 50-50. No, let's split the difference. Many concessions, not lots as in MANY, but small concessions given out slowly and discreetly and always in exchange for a concession by the other side. I like to prioritize my concessions on what's the most important to least important to me, and always start giving the concessions that are least important in order to get the ones that are most important in the form of a concession from the other side. In writing at every stage. Summarize every conversation, summarize every meeting, put it in writing, encapsulate it in email. As per our meeting this afternoon, we agreed to blah, 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 blah. Then in opening the next meeting, bring that back up, and it gives you the ability to say, what has changed since we last met, if anything? No, everything's fine. Great, let's move forward. Or, well, the price of oil has gone from $98 to $50 a barrel, and we no longer have any budget. That's why we need to know that, because that will determine the action that we take going forward. Insulate the decision maker. Smaller companies really struggle with this, especially large ego business owners who feel that they have to be at the table. They have to represent the company. This is why we have secretaries of states and emissaries that represent us. They go and they negotiate the treaty, and then the treaty is signed, or in our case in the business world, the binding contract is signed by the authorized authority, the CEO or the president. But the person who's actually negotiating the deal is someone lower within the organization that is a professional negotiator. Many times that's a salesperson or somebody in the procurement organization, depending upon what it is that we're buying and selling. The key in this, though, for you as a negotiator, never, ever allow the other party to negotiate directly with the ultimate decision maker who has the power of the pen to execute the contract within your organization, because there is no room for retreat. In dealing with them, the magic words that you can use is, this sounds very agreeable to me. However, it's going to require executive review and approval for signature. Now what I've done is I've left, in a positive way, the door open for me to come back, and I can continue the negotiation and negotiate far more and far better, because I have to actually do two sales. One is with you as the customer, and one is I have to convince my boss that this is a good deal for my company. So I'm in that agency arrangement of dealing with both sides. Insulating the decision maker gives me the power to do this, and I can negotiate a far better finalized deal. And again, What has changed between every meeting, every contact? Always open with, great to see you. Since we last met or we last spoke, what, if anything, has changed within the market, your organization, you, whatever it may be? That currency of accurate and timely information is imperative. Lastly, think with your head and not with your heart. Many times people fall in love with their deal the longer that a negotiation goes on, and they move from looking at things with a rational economic perspective, and they fall in love with, I have to make this deal happen. And people know this, and so people will prolong, and they will get closer and closer to the deadline so that I have greater emotional leverage, especially if you've bought in at the emotional leverage to having to make the deal happen. This happens a lot with people that are highly aspirational and need to make a big deal to meet their quota. They need it for promotion. CEOs need to put their big stamp. Politicians need to show that they have the ability to negotiate major legacy deals with other countries. Think with your head, not with your heart. All right, I'm going to leave you two best practices, and then we're going to adjourn. Number one is pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Be a pig. Get fat. This is a long-term life of being a professional negotiator. Your word is your bond, and your reputation will precede you into any negotiation. It's far, far better to be known as a tough but fair negotiator than that guy would talk the skin off a snake and say anything to get a deal. You don't want to be the hog, because people will not engage with the hog, or they will come into it with such a defensive posture. There is no way you'll be able to get what you want, and you will have to satisfy for what you need. Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. And similar to that is a great saying, but take it to heart because it is so true. You can shear a sheep once a year, but you can only skin him once. So what you want to do through your reputation and your performance as a professional negotiator is you want to develop a flock of sheep who enjoy working with you because they know that you are a fair and equitable professional negotiator, and they're willing to engage with you, and so you have the ability to harvest and shear the sheep once a year. But if you take somebody for all they have and you make it so painful and so embarrassing that they have nothing to show for the deal that they've entered into with you, they now have lost all they have. You skinned that sheep, and you'll never be able to skin that sheep again. And very, very quickly, what you will find is there are no sheep to be sheared. So I thank you again. It's been great to be with you. I would encourage everyone, if you found this of interest or you have questions, your feedback is invaluable to us, and we thank you so very much. Feel free to email me, tim.phillips@revenade.com, or feel free to call me. My personal number, 713-208-7902. And you can check out our website at www.revenade.com to learn more about Revenade and all of our capabilities. Again, thanks for joining us today. Look forward to next time, and until then, to your sales success.